So like any good presenter, I spent the day reworking my slides and getting nervous. So I have not practiced this version of the deck before, so it's very much with you guys. So my name is Frank Rietta, as I said, and my background is been working with startups and as a programmer pretty much my entire career. I've been programming every day since I was 14. Originally, way back then, taught myself QBasic, eventually got a computer science degree, then then sold the web hosting company that I had started running when I was a teenager just before I graduated, and then decided to do grad school where I did information security at Tech. So, and then just more and more. So basically, I'm crazy. I've never actually gotten a real job. I've always been hustling some idea or working with companies or doing that sort of thing, and that's just been my career path to this point. So anyway, we're going to get started on some fun stuff. So the slides are up here. It's on my speaker deck. So if you want that, that's fine. Here's how we're going to start this thing. Who knows anything about security at all? Raise your hand. Who is terrified with things like our data breach that happened with Anthem today? I literally just got an email from them as I was like sitting down to the dear member. So who has heard like, oh, Mac is more secure than Windows, or Windows is really more secure, or any of those sorts of silly games? Yeah? So doesn't it often seem that the question is this secure or not? Like, let's ask the question, is Rails secure? What's wrong with that question?
It's an absolute nothing.
Right, it's on or off, right? You turn on the secure switch and we're fine. We don't have any problems. SSL it, right? We're done, check. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So anytime, and this is really going to be the trick, anytime anyone asks you if something is secure, you know, in your job as a developer, actually, let me check on this. How many people are actually developers? OK. This talk is really for you guys, because at the end of the day, this is not a technical talk. It is a developer ethics talk. It's going to be very interesting. How many people would be more managers or commissioners of custom software projects? OK, a few. Cool. This is for you too, because there are some patterns that are very common in business that you have to hide from or be aware of. And one of them is that a lot of decisions are in your company's prerogative to choose for yourselves, when some things are not, especially when it involves other people's information. OK, so here's the 3 questions that will turn you from a developer making like $100 an hour to a security consultant making like $300 an hour, on like once a gig a year. No, I'm just kidding. And that gets into like who buys security. Secure against what? So for example, there are constant persistent threats. Like there are the bot equivalents of rattling every door and see which one's popped. To protect yourself against those, you principally do not have to have Fort Knox security. You just have to be better than the next insecure site so that you don't have a problem. If your adversary is the National Security Agency and you have a tailored access division order out for you, you're probably already hacked. So, like again, secure against what? That's what is the worst thing that can happen? Oh yeah, but that's the next question. So, if we have a cat photo sharing site, and the worst thing that can happen is, geez, I don't know. I mean, someone posts another cat photo under someone else's account, then maybe, you know, it's OK to have, you know, less than wonderful password requirements, or maybe you don't even need it. You use something else. But if you are dealing with financial data or personal information, like if your staff members don't have 2-factor authentication, you are asking for trouble, because staff members pick terrible passwords. They tell them to their coworkers, which is illegal in some states, by the way. But they tell them to the coworkers. They email it to themselves. That then gets found because who knows about that. And next thing you know, someone from Romania is logging in and pulling your customer records because you had no backup. You had no defense in depth strategy past that employee having access to do their job. That's the biggest problem with outside shell, but we completely trust someone who entered a 9-character terrible password, from anywhere in the world for any reason, for any duration, and we have no way of detecting that they were there or not. You're in trouble. Compared to what alternative? I like to say this one. Sometimes people say, well, I don't know about this Ruby thing. It seems kind of new. Like, is it secure enough? And you look at them, compared to what? Your custom PHP code? I mean, yeah, I mean, seriously. I mean, that's the sort of thing when these arguments get into play. So it's not an on and off switch. That's all you have to remember from that slide. So what is security? So here is an interesting thing. When I was in graduate school, this was about 2006, I took a IT or programming project management class, something or other. And the professor, we were doing this design thing. They called them use cases in this class. It's like a user story with more bullet points. And I kept on wanting to think about like authentication and other security things because, it was important. And the professor told me in front of the whole class, Frank, security is not a functional requirement. So we were just not dealing with that because that's not what this class is about. That's another class. We're a project management class. And it made me, I was like, no, it can't be that way. Yes, I was a student, and yes, I told the professor that. Security cannot possibly be treated as a non-functional requirement because here's what this means most of the time. It means that you don't talk about it up front. It doesn't get incorporated in the design. The system gets built, goes to production. No one ever thought about this thing at all. There's no defense in depth strategy because that can really only be driven from a standpoint of a written information security policy. And poof, you have an insecure system that you can try to spend as much money bolting on security. I'm sure antivirus and firewall companies will love you, but it's really an ineffective tool. It's one tool amongst many, and if those are your only tools, you're in real trouble. Basically, at the end of the day, everyone was depending on someone else to do this security thing, and yet no one was doing it. So literally, security becomes no one's job when we call security a non-functional requirement. So it may be technically, academically true, but no one here is allowed to think like that, if you're smart. So what is it really about? It's about risks and risk management. So most people really can't tell what the relative risk of logging into their corporate web application from their phone when it's tied to an unencrypted hotspot at a coffee shop because they don't have a data cap. They don't know. People really can't tell why they shouldn't use the same password on the cat sharing site that they use on their bank. And so now when the cat sharing site found out that because they didn't need to have good security, they didn't actually do passwords right, their password database gets breached, and people's emails and passwords get used to log into their bank accounts and investment accounts and steal money. So they don't understand that. The funny thing is developers have troubles with risks too. So why, for example, do I really have to clean up my routes file and not leave default routes around? I mean, we took the link out from the markup of the view. This whole role-based access control, this can thing is really inconvenient right now. Let's just let the user log in and let the API client tell which account ID to use because, I mean, it's our Android app. I mean, it's not going to mess up. We control the code. Yeah, it's that bad sometimes. So the truth is, anyone can decompile your Android app. You got to assume they're trying anyway. And basically, that is one of the OWASP top 10, where you have direct object access leading to someone being able to steal other people's information, so beyond their access. So classically, security is about covering the CIA. And that stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. This triad is very important. Notice the availability part. A lot of people don't think things like defending against denial of service or network architecture is a security function, but it really is. There are typically 2 additional areas if you want to go all out about what security as a profession cares about, and that's non-repudiation and non-repudiation and there's another A. I don't know right now. Anyway, so here is the next thing that you have to worry about. Oh, well, do I hit play? Do I hit that? How about I walk over here and click on this? Okay. Who has heard about things like top secret information like in a governmental context? Yeah, good. We've all heard of that. The books, when you read about this, and they talk about mandatory access control and all these things, they often hand wave and say, oh yeah, companies have this stuff too, but then they never really talk about it. So here's an example of a commercial information classification system. So you have 5 classes of information, and this is vitally important in your user story writing and whatever you're going to do. So you have public information and internal use. So these are things that you're either is public on your website. Internal use is just stuff that the business may care about, but no law really cares about it, and it doesn't impact someone else, like business plans or something. I mean, you can think of what these could be. Confidential is information that customers consider confidential. Sensitive, we're going to get into this. This is covered by state and federal laws that define what these pieces of information in and what the repercussions of a data breach are. Highly sensitive, encryption keys, server secrets, like this is the keys to the kingdom. Notice the 2 lines here. They're not there by accident. So one of the biggest mistakes that business owners and managers make is they presume that on their custom system, the system that they control, that they get to make all of the choices about what they can do. Brandon, can you do me a favor? Make sure the lights are all, I'm having one of these, like I didn't turn off the stove, like things going on. Like the light on the microphone on the camera should be green. Yeah. Okay, it's cool. That will go on YouTube too. Anyway, confidential, all these things. But the truth is, only above the yellow line is it their prerogative. Below the red line is the get in lots of trouble and potentially one day go to jail stuff. I'll give you an example in a minute on Tennessee. There's a law in Tennessee that is a misdemeanor. So go to jail for up to a year to cause a social security number to be transmitted, unencrypted, or to not be encrypted in storage. It's a misdemeanor crime in the state. So if your boss says, just add the field, don't worry about it, and you do, it may be a little ambiguous, but it is possible someone's going to jail, and someone is going to be found grossly negligent in that instance. And that's the sort of stuff that are possibly happening, and this more can happen. And the example of a yellow line violation is this. So Mike is part of the Ruby community in Atlanta, and I use this with his permission, but he posted this on Facebook. I learned today that Airbnb auto-posts my selected favorites to Facebook. No, that's not why I clicked sign in with Facebook button. I wanted to get through sign up faster, not broadcast where I was thinking of staying. So how many people does it take to see this? It's like, oh, I don't want to use Airbnb. And that's because even though there was probably a mice print somewhere in the contract, and some investors said, we have to have more social engagement, and the company did that, this is the potential ramifications, because Micah did not perceive that that was part of this deal when he logged in through that mechanism. That was not a normal behavior that was anticipated with the, hey, do you want to sign in this way? It's a little bit more convenient for you. That's a yellow line violation. So look at Tennessee statute, release of okay, this is where we get into the red line stuff. What is personally identifiable information? Well, each state has their own law. Georgia's is slightly different where I'm from, but it's largely the same. And there could be a federal one day. But we don't have to guess about this. Personal information means an individual's first name or first initial and last name in combination with any one or more of the following data elements when either the name or the data elements are not encrypted. In Georgia, it says redacted. You don't have that option here. It has to be encrypted in the state of Tennessee. And that is social security number, the driver's license number, which we'll get to later in the example with a real-life business use case that required a driver's license. Account number, credit card or debit card number, in any combination of any required security code, access code, or password that would permit access to an individual financial account. So any of these things are going to be PII. They don't call out passwords like they do in Georgia, which is interesting. So maybe bad password hashing is not a data breach, but I suspect it probably is under some other statute. I'm not a lawyer in Tennessee. Don't take my advice. I'm actually not a lawyer anywhere. Don't take my advice on legal things, but I can read and say scary things. Okay, so here's another one. This is the one I was just talking about here, guys. This is fun. Any business, and the part that I kind of struck out, apparently medical companies are completely exempted, which makes no sense to me. Social security number be required to be transmitted over the internet unless the internet connection used is secure. Well, so now when it gets prosecuted, you can argue whether SSL was secure enough or not. So it has to be secure. So is that an on-off switch test? Oh, you had a data breach, therefore you weren't secure, therefore you misled the public. And we can find you guilty under this. That maybe is the way it could work. That's how Snapchat got in trouble with the FTC, by the way. They claimed that the images were more ephemeral than they could really be. It turned out that it couldn't be that way. Therefore, it wasn't secure. Therefore, your claims of security were misleading the public. Therefore, as the guardians of consumer protection in the United States, we can come down on you and demand IT audits for 20 years on that. And that sort of thing can happen. OK, so back to this one. Be required to log in or access internet website unless used in combination. OK, so you can't use it if you're – that's interesting. OK, so you're not supposed to use an SSN as a single security capability, a single piece of information that grants you access. So, and it's a Class B misdemeanor, so that's go to jail. Anyway, so it's good to know. So let's talk about data breaches. Does anyone have any questions? This is kind of the end of the introductory section before we get into the fun parts. Yes, sir?
Just one simple comment. If healthcare is specifically excluded on that as public, it's covered under federal law.
OK.
It's violates HIPAA laws.
Yeah, with HIPAA and everything.
To have it be more restrictive than HIPAA? OK, that makes sense.
If you have a social security number on, say, a pre-registration form, it has to be then on a HIPAA compliant server and all then also stuff.
Right. Yeah. And HIPAA says a lot of things that people don't think it says, and vice versa. So it's fortunately this is not a HIPAA talk. It does. I've tried to understand it a few times.
HIPAA reading support.
OK. It's like PCI DSS. It's like 75 pages of light bedtime reading. Any other questions on this? Yes, sir?
Yeah, this may not be answerable, but do you know if these laws only cover businesses located in Tennessee?
With nexus in Tennessee. So that could be located here, or I suppose if you had enough customers here, states have ways of reaching out and grabbing you if they really want
Basically,
to.
if money changed hands to a person in the state of Tennessee, that's business nexus in Tennessee, and you're susceptible to all that. That said, every other state has similar laws. So if you're going to do business with some company who thinks they can get out of your Tennessee law, you should check what their state's law is so that they know.
And that's actually really easy. I can send a link to anyone who wants it. My cheat sheet is, I forget the name of the page because it's bookmarked, but it's a list of like every state's data breach law. So I click over on that, I go to LexisNexis, I copy and paste the code section. I'm like, have you discussed this with general counsel? And usually that equates to another phone call, and now they're finally listening to us about the security thing. So, I mean, yes?
Just a quick comment from the lawyer in the room. Usually wherever there is harm that has happened, there is nexus. So if someone's hurt and they care about it where they are, you're probably on that.
Thank you. OK, a litany of data breaches. Here's the fun part. Let's go. OK, Anthem Blue Cross. This is today. Attackers gained unauthorized access to Anthem's IT systems and have obtained current and former members, I'm going to get into that in a second, such as their names, birthdays, medical IDs, social security numbers, street addresses, email, entire docs. In the wake of attack, Anthem has reset the passwords of all employees with higher level access to its data system and has blocked all access that involves only one password. Translation, up to today, Anthem had sensitive information on servers that did not require two-factor authentication. That's insane. 80 million people potentially affected. And there's going to be a lot more coming out about this. This is literally today. The former members, I have that highlighted. What does that tell you? Do they not have a data retention policy that cycles out records that are no longer relevant to the current operations of the company? If they do, it sure doesn't sound like it, unless it's like a 15-year retention period. So, yeah, I mean, for a company that does this much in-depth information to not, it is crazy to have this much data in one place without a strong data retention policy that cycles out data that's no longer necessary, without two-factor authentication that segments access based upon roles and enforces the possession of something that the authorized person has in addition to what they know, and without probably an adequate defense in depth strategy. I bet they do network level security and it doesn't go down into their application design or their information architecture. It just wasn't part of the process. OK, I'm mad enough. Let me get 6. OK, Bitly. Here, this is actually a Rails app, to the best of my knowledge. In May 2014, it doesn't matter though, this is a side channel attack. The offsite database backup was compromised. All data, including users' API keys and hash passwords, were exposed. The backup database was not encrypted. It turns out the attackers gained access to a database backup through a compromised employee account, specifically their source code repository access. So a developer, yes, sir. Oh, that wasn't a question. So a developer's account was able to log in, and in the code repo was this key or password to the backup site. They were able to then go and download a backup of the entire production system, because that wasn't production, so it wasn't protected as well. And a developer had access to it. I mean, when you're a 2-person startup and your developer has access, that's probably OK. It's really hard to do segment separation of responsibilities in an organization that small. Bitly's bigger than that. So this is a problem. So they started using two-factor authentication. And if they had been using that already, this attack would have never taken place. OK, so again, a loss for lack of two-factor that led to a data breach. BufferApp. Oh, this one's awesome. OK, so BufferApp's a really popular social media publishing platform, and they use the services of MongoHQ. MongoHQ has this great ability where they're able to provide customer service by masquerading as a customer's account to then be able to help them. So it turns out customer service agents at MongoHQ did not have to have two-factor authentication. Nor were the passwords rotated, apparently. So a customer service agent had emailed himself his password at some point. An attacker somehow gained access to this password, authenticated as his customer service agent, and proceeded to download customer records, including API keys for BufferApp. And then they were able to masquerade as their Twitter account and do other very embarrassing things. So they were able to gain access to private information, not of MongoHQ, but of MongoHQ's customers. So BufferApp was breached not because of their own company having a security failing, but because of one of their cloud service providers' company having a security failing outside of their control. Humana's data breach. This one was fun. This was in Atlanta, 2014. So an employee had some data on a laptop. The laptop was encrypted. The laptop was in the trunk of a car. and that probably would have been fine, except there was an unencrypted external disk, a thumb drive, also there. Presumably, this wasn't in the announcement, but presumably so that the person could copy data between their encrypted computer and whatever system at work they needed to copy stuff from. But because of the presence of that, unless the data was encrypted provision doesn't apply, and they get to announce a data breach. Target and Home Depot, big deals. I don't have time to go into it now. Needless to say, lots of people got pwned. At the end, it had to do with persistent malware on the terminals that sidestepped the normal things and caused problems. So, and we're going to get chip and pin cards probably because of it. So, yes, it can happen to you too. How are we on time? Cool. So I'm going to give an example now from a real project. It's been sufficiently anonymized so that I can talk openly about it. And it's going to be about dealing with a requirement to collect driver's license data. So, and we're going to talk about using the paperclip gem, which the application was already using, and GNU-PG, which is used for encrypted emails and things, so PGP for public key. And there will be some fun aspects of that. So let's start with a user story, like any good Agile process. As a pawn shop clerk, I scan a copy of the customer's driver's license because the company is required by law to keep this record at least 2 years from the date we purchased a used valuable from the customer. So the theory is anytime you have like a pawn shops type operations where people are selling maybe expensive jewelry or other things to get money, that's ripe for abuse by thieves who steal other people's valuable property, sell it for money, and then the police come knocking, wonder, what happened to it. So then they pull the record and say, it was this guy that sold it to us. So then they can continue on the investigation. So there's no getting around this if you're in this business, which we'll get to in a second. And so there are two laws in this case. You have the law that says you're not supposed to store driver's license, and if they go missing, bad things are going to happen to you. And you have another law is we are requiring you to store photocopies of driver's licenses for at least 2 years. So let's get into that. Security facts for this user story. The data is an image of a driver's license, which is protected information by law. Is it protected by state law? Yes. Can we avoid storing it? No. What is the retention period? 2 years. By the way, the first version of the story did not include the retention period. I had to ask lots of questions to figure out what that was. Because, and the theory is, just because we can store the data securely, just because we can encrypt it, we do not want to store it forever. Because that's how you end up with something like a Blue Cross Anthem situation, where who knows how far their data went back. At 2 years and 1 day, I don't want this data. I want it to go away. I don't want to be responsible for it. I don't want it coming back. We're not required past that point to keep it. So, at the conclusion of the data retention period, a record should show that the system did collect the required information, but that it has been deleted in the ordinary course of business at the conclusion of the retention period. That's very important too. That also has to do with like when you get sued and someone seeks like emails from your company, and if you thought you were about to get sued and you deleted the emails, you're now in a lot of trouble. But if they decided to sue you, like unfortunately just after your normal 90-day retention period, we're just on the ordinary course of business, poof, they're gone, then you didn't do that to hide data. It was just what you did, and that's legal. And that we would use a public key encryption using GNU-PG so that the server will have never had the key needed to decrypt an encrypted driver's license. Okay, so this is important. What is the worst thing that can happen? The worst thing that can happen is our server gets hacked, completely pwned. The password database is compromised. Every last byte on the server is compromised in a Sony-like data breach. Do we have a data breach of driver's license data? No, because the decryption key was not present in the information that was accessible by the attacker in a complete server compromise situation. That is a security requirement that very few people go to, but if you can pull that off, then you're ahead of the game. Ask me how we do that. We use PGP smart cards. All the PGP keys authorized to access this information was needed was pre-programmed on a set of YubiKey Neos. Do I have a picture on the next one? I have a picture somewhere. There we go, YubiKey Neos. And these are designed to be tamper resistant, to not be copyable. And this is much better than decryption keys. So these can be stored in safes. They can be issued to employees when they need to carry out an investigation to retrieve a driver's license. There's a lot of things they can do. They are not on the server. A hacker in Romania with a remote compromise is not going to have access to this thing, is the trick. So something you have and the access to deal with it.
How much does this cost?
$50 each for the Neos. You can get OpenPGP smart cards imported from Germany for about 30 euros, so about 50 bucks by the time you deal with it either way. But it's pretty awesome because you can say, this is your key, do not lose it. And people have, it's really easy to understand. The Neos are nice because they also now support the FIDO universal two-factor authentication. And if you have staff members that don't need the encryption, you can get an $18 one, the blue one for that. So you can have staff members all have access, and special staff members have the ones with the encryption key capability. So it's very affordable. I think on this project, it cost us less than $300 to get the number of devices needed, which is nothing. It's like, as a security control, what you get from it is worth so much more than that amount of money. So design considerations. Protect the data with encryption and access control. So we're going to encrypt it. We're going to put it on a OpenStack files. You could use S3 too, but we are on an OpenStack platform. Put it there, and we're going to gate access control through can. So only certain types of users can even access the data, and when it happens, it's logged. This is another security control I'm not going to go into. It's basically telling people they're being watched. So for example, if you click normal things around, but if you click download the driver's license, there's a permanent record that says Bob Smith downloaded this customer's driver's license on this date, and it's visible to the customer service agents that this is happening. So that discourages someone from just, you know, if they're supposed to pull it up, they can. If they're not, they're discouraged from it. Only a small number of people who work there can do it at all. And if they do, it's still encrypted. The server can't decrypt it. They have to have a key and have the decryption software provisioned on their authorized computer in order to be able to do any other step. Yes, sir?
That type of access logging is also a way so that the bosses know who to fire when something bad does happen. And so it's not just that, well, we reset everyone's passwords. Hopefully this doesn't happen again. Like, you can sort of get to the root of the problem quickly, swiftly, deal with it, and be able to move on quickly. It's a big mitigation factor.
Yeah, and hopefully you never have to use it. And you don't necessarily want to do that for everything, but it's a big deal. So that's the log access. The project was already using paperclip, so we stuck with it. If you were using carrier wave, you would just use that instead. And the app.
The question on that.
Yes.
I don't remember paperclip specifically, but I know one of the things I've dealt with a lot of uploading of files, and one of the things I never did was allow an unprocessed file public access. Like somebody could never upload a JPEG, and I would then serve that JPEG.
Correct.
I would always go through ImageMagick or some kind of processing.
And that's in fact, did you ever create custom processors?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's actually what I did.
I actually worked in Visual where Micah worked at.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Yes, he's right. That's a good one. Actually, Paperclip added a feature that was really annoying because we had to disable it for this, so I'm still working on the workaround for that. They detect MIME type changes and they put the kibosh, and you can't overwrite it. So I had to turn off that feature because when you encrypt a file and it goes in a JPEG and it comes out a text PGP, That's a change. And in this case, we wanted that. But yes, that's why they added that feature, by the way. What you're talking about is someone uploading, say, an executable PHP script as a JPEG, and it really wasn't a JPEG. So they added the file type detection, so it has to stay the same type throughout the process. And that's what I had to bypass for this particular application. So we made sure to have other security mechanisms to protect against that particular risk. The application and its API endpoints are already SSL only with strict transport security turned on. So strict transport security, by the way, means never, ever, ever, you publish this when you do the response, never, ever, ever talk to me on port 80 again. And Chrome and all the browsers will respect that. So you can, and Google gives you a SEO boost. And we assume the company already knows about GPG. OK, so here's kind of a layout. So we have a controller that's going to do the upload and download actions, and it's going to work with CanCan to decide which users can do that. There's going to be a model, so it's called a secure attachment. This is a pretty normal paperclip style model. Has everyone done paperclip or something like that before, like attaching a files? So it's really nicely packaged gem. You don't have to do that much work. We're going to create a custom paperclip filter to encrypt with GPG rather than resize images. So the normal pattern is you upload an image, it gets resized to certain styles, and then sent off to live in its happy little place on the files container from there. So instead of resizing, we're going to encrypt. And then you could use S3, but we're using a private OpenStack files container. The expiration date is set on each file, so the files container will auto-delete it. So the Rails application is not responsible for that. And there's no publicly accessible URLs for these files. So unlike maybe media content that we wanted to pump to a CDN, we don't want that. And all the downloads get gated through this download controller so that we can authorize it and we can log who did it. Yes, sir?
I just remembered one important consideration about the paperclip upload. Paperclip, by default, if you set it up to use S3 or some other file bucket, it will just upload the original file directly to that and then do the work on it afterwards. And you don't want that in this case. You want the plain text to never exist in storage anywhere. And so we specifically override the default setting to make it write the encrypted version to the only location that is stored instead of having two files. One is unencrypted, one is encrypted version of it.
And the next version of this would be the unencrypted data never hits disk. Yeah. So there's only, so we've gone from like in storage to a brief amount of time there may be a temp file during the processing that the data is available in the system unencrypted. So it goes over the SSL, it lands on the server, took just enough time for it to be encrypted, that be deleted, and it moves on. So that is still a surface area that there could be an attack. That would be a Home Depot-like attack with some persistent malware could get at that. And that's further work to make this work and make this a gem, probably. So let's look at the model. In this case, we're using Rackspace's implementation of OpenStack. Well, really, it's OpenStack. So we're using the fog gem instead of S3, but it accomplishes the same thing. It's largely a drop-in. So this part here is pretty important. Has attached file, secure data. This is the secure attachment. This is the normal paperclip validations that have to be there. You'll notice this processor, PGP encrypt to finance team, styles. You have to have this hash, otherwise it wasn't. That was about 5 hours of troubleshooting. That was painful. I never thought I would go that deep in comments on Stack Overflow, but I finally saw someone comment. I'm like, oh, I wonder if it's like that, and found it. And then this is actually easier with S3. You can just set a delete at header. When you're using fog, you have to do it this way. But that's all this is doing, is getting a timestamp of when we want it to delete 2 years from now. And that's getting set in. And this is the filter. I mean, you could get way more fancy. But you override, you just follow this. You create a processor. This function you want to override called make. So it makes a temp file, sets it to bin mode, encrypts the contents. And this, the encrypt function just pulls up GPG-ME, which is a gem that talks to GNUPG, pulls the keys from another function and the content from another function here. You can imagine what they do. Boom, signs it, done. So this basically is all this filter does. And so this is where it ended up on this space here. And it automatically gets delete, random file names, and Amazon S3 would work as well. And that translates to Sunday, the 22nd of January, 2017. Yes?
So practical question there, you're deleting exactly 2 years after the file was created. But if what's
2 years
the
and a day,
procedure, how long does the procedure take if you need to actually investigate something for that to affect? Like if somebody reached out to you 1 year and 364 days
and you had to hurry
and needed to see a particular license, do you have assurances that you will not have deleted it in between the time of receiving that?
In this implementation, there was no user story for that. The practical answer in this case is that you would click the download link and download the file. And that's what you would do. I mean, you could still have a backup of this container.
You should probably factor in the recovery and investigation time frame into your...
Okay, so beyond the 2 years?
Right.
Okay, that's probably a good idea.
I think that's more of a legal question, if does the time reset on...
Well, your retention period should really then, you don't have a 2-year retention period. You have a 2-year and some amount of time, and I agree. I think that's something for legal counsel to decide. As developers, they said 2 years, and I'm like, 2 years and a day? Done, check, delivered. What would you think about that if you had to?
I think your default is probably your 2 years, or whatever your policy says. You're going to get rid of the document after that period of time, unless you're using it for some other purpose. And you just, in your terms of service, you give yourself the right to continue to hold that information beyond the 2 years, but no obligation to keep it.
I was saying, if you get a subpoena 1 year and 364 days into it,
yeah, you just
then
pull
I'm
it.
saying like it may take more than a day for you to respond to that subpoena and find the file.
Absolutely.
Okay, so yeah, so maybe it should be some extra days in addition to 2 years. That's a good idea. No, that's fine.
And from a coding perspective, it's almost like you can just set up a variable, like, is there some reason you need to keep this? If yes, then don't delete it.
Right. Well, in this case, you would bump the expiration date or remove it. So the expiration date gets set when the file is uploaded. And that's it. I was going to show you decrypting it, but I'm using their computer. It's GPG. You double click it, it asks you for a password or PIN number, and then it decrypts it. So in this workflow, the authorized person, they need to investigate it. They pull up the profile. There's a link that says download driver's license. When they do that, it goes through the download action, and it just downloads as a normal file to their disk, something .jpeg, .gpg. They go get their smart card, they plug it in, they double click the file, and go from there. The web application has no work at all in that part of the process, which is what we want, because if someone hacks the web server and owns everything, we don't want a data breach of this protected information. So any questions about this example at all? Good feedback, guys. So the professional ethics piece is really the heart of this entire talk. And the concept is that as developers, we make a lot of decisions that impact people's lives. And oftentimes, what the perception is that we should just do what we're asked to do. Just, build this feature, have it ask for these fields, just store it in a database, don't worry about it. The problem is the people we're working with don't necessarily have all the knowledge to realize what is in their own best interests. So the default of that we are called to say yes sir, yes ma'am, and then just do it and not to push back or anything is fundamentally flawed. The relationship as a developer is more akin to a physician or an engineer, someone where those of us doing the actual work know far more about the problems that our customers are facing in this space than they themselves know. So it is, in my case personally, I've had the instances where I've had to say, I'm sorry, I cannot implement that for you because of these reasons. Like, you're not willing to spend the extra time to do this right. You don't want to use this encryption stuff because it sounds complicated. You don't want to change your business model to avoid information that you really could avoid collecting altogether. You just want to move quickly, and you don't want to do anything really other than just throw it together, put it out in the world, and go live. And I have to say, I'm sorry, I am not professionally, ethically able to do that for you because I don't need this job. I'm called to do what's right by society and by my own standards, and I know better. So if there's a data breach because I build a system that I know is insufficiently secure, I know it. I studied information security. I've been programming for a long time. Even if you don't have an InfoSec degree, you know way more about this. You know about the statutes. So what happens when there's a breach and you have to go before a judge and say, well, yeah, I kind of knew we weren't supposed to do that, but my boss said I was supposed to, so I just figured I'd do it. That's not as strong of an argument as saying, listen, we did everything that we possibly knew to do to reasonably guard against this situation. Despite our best efforts, the Chinese hacked us and took the data. Or some like sophisticated adversary took it. Then you're I mean, yes, it's bad, but you're not individually going to be found to be negligent. Whereas, and the other thing, if you're grossly negligent, there could be consequences not just for your own reputation, but in certain extreme cases, you could even possibly go to jail. And those instances are going to continue to increase. Right now, it's if you misappropriate a social security number. In the future, it's because there's a data breach of sufficient size that what's now just an FTC audit fine becomes like a Sarbanes-Oxley-like requirements for CTOs to have provably done enough to protect the public. So I think everyone has to draw a line in the sand and determine for yourself what you're willing to do and what you're not willing to do. And you need to take a principled stand. And it's the same thing as code craftsmanship. Oh, don't do tests. I don't want you to do that. That just takes so much time. But you know better. You know that that helps you build better software. And every time you let that slide as a team, technical debt sneaks into the project. And eventually, sometimes you can do that. You can just keep on borrowing on that technical debt credit card. We'll charge this, and it'll be okay. And you do it again, and you do it again, and you do it again, and then your new developer does it, and then there's a pattern that follows. And a few years down the road, the company is in a position that a developer comes in, or they do a code review or want to do a new feature, and it becomes really I'm sorry to let you know that you cannot afford the minimum payments on your technical debt, that your project is technically bankrupt. Same thing can happen with security. Oh yeah, we don't need to worry about this. Let's just put this together, get it out there, the customers sign up, and we have thousands of users, and we have millions of users. Now we have 5 million users, and at some point it becomes really expensive to try to bolt on security. Maybe you were lucky and the bad guys just never came around to it, or that you never got compromised by a YAML parser vulnerability that allowed to a remote code execution in your Rails stack. Or maybe you were, and you just found out that they used it to pop a reverse shell and you're just running Bitcoin mining on your Amazon cloud instances. But that may also be a data breach because it is presumed if there's a toe in the door, then the breach is complete. Because most of the time you can't prove what they did and did not access. And oh yeah, enterprise level logging. Like, oh, do you just throw away your raw access logs and your SQL logs, or do you send them to a syslog ng server where you're able to categorize them and overlay events that happen across your stack and have a retention period of a year or 7 years? Like some industries require that. Does your client know what their log retention periods are or should be? And if not, your default shouldn't be we never pay attention to them. You know, as a professional, ethical developer, you should just, you know, ask them these questions. And if they don't have answers, require that they develop answers. And if they can't do that, then me personally, I walk, because I can't ethically do work under those conditions. So I promise you practical countermeasures. So before we close out, I want to make sure you have some. These are kind of the big ones. A defense in depth strategy is a must. And in the Ruby community especially, I find this is one of the hardest concepts because it is absolutely antithetical to dry. Like we like to say, don't repeat yourself. You know, just solve it one way. And it's not actually antithetical to dry, it just feels like it. Because a defense in depth strategy says, do not have one countermeasure to guard against a bad thing that may happen. Have multiple concurrent countermeasures that check and recheck. And so you check it at the controller in a can, and you check each variable in the function call, and you raise exceptions if anything's out of range, and you have SSL, and you have this, and you have a firewall, and you have an IDS, and you have multiple concurrent security countermeasures based upon the information security policy that is necessary for the type of company you're doing this application for. You don't depend on one lock. You have a defense in depth strategy. Use secure HTTP headers and go SSL only with strict transport security all the time. I would go as far as to say this is no longer a choice for any of our clients. There is no benefit to having an unencrypted website. It does not slow it down. And there is benefits to get some SEO boost from having an HSTS header set. So just every website, SSL certificate, and the only response from port 80 should be to redirect permanent to the encrypted site and then declare it off limits. It is no longer negotiable in 2015. Just do it as a developer. I really believe that. And one step further from that is one of the things it protects against is a side channel attack that can happen if you don't have the secure flag set in Rails. The cookie gets set without a secure flag. So someone logs in to your web application. You go to an SSL login page. You set the cookie, so their session cookie, right? So they can continue to go. And then they go away. And then they come back, and they are at, say, Starbucks, okay, or a hotspot. And they hit the page, but they don't type HTTPS. So they hit your port 80 traffic, and your port 80 traffic just redirects to the secure site. Why do you have a problem? Because guess what tagged along with that unencrypted request that you have no control over? The browser dutifully repeated the session cookie over a non-encrypted channel. Yes, sir?
So you're saying you don't have an auto redirect to HTTPS?
Yeah. No. I'm saying two things. Be sure the secure flag is set in the application.rb, which will tell Rails to set. There's a flag, a standard flag on cookies that say this is a secure cookie, so you can, the browser will only send it over the encrypted connection. So set that, and set HSTS, which is declared as a header on the server, and Chrome will obey that. Everything other than Internet Explorer will obey that right now, and Internet Explorer hopefully. Well, Brandon, is it IE 11 on board yet?
I think IE 12 will have it.
Okay, IE 12 will have it.
IE 11 also has it, but there's some exception where it doesn't work as expected.
Okay.
100% of the time.
So the idea is the browser will not talk to you again on port 80. So since we're in Nashville, I will make, no, I won't make a music joke. There's some pop song that's coming about in mind about like never getting back together with port 80.
New York, it's fine.
Oh, okay. There's a great Twitter page that's like InfoSec Taylor Swift. It's great. So include security concerns in your user story writing and always ask about ways to change the business model to avoid PII. So that's the pushback phase. Just, you have to do it. They don't know enough to know what matters outside of, And run automated audit tools such as Brakeman, Bundler Audit, Code Climate, and Linters. These are very helpful. In a classroom version, you can go see the video. I taught this at Tech Talent South and actually did a live exploit example on a Rails app that Brakeman was saying had no security vulnerabilities. It was awesome. So it's a useful tool, but it doesn't catch everything. So thanks. And when cryptography is outlawed, bleh, only outlaws will have crypto. So we have questions. We had some good ones, right?
Are there any gems or plugins that you recommend that, if you don't have all the answers to some of the stuff and you're, consultant or freelancer or whatever, or usually one-man job, like our rules of thumb to go by?
So the question is, if you're not an expert or you're a consultant or you have to take care of a lot of things by yourself, are there any rules of thumb that you can go by? What specifically about? You mean for technical reasons or working with the business owners to understand what you're trying to do?
I mean, whether you're working for a business owner or working for yourself, your own startup or whatever. So for example, I have experience with Splunk for syslog parsing, but I mean, not everyone's going to have that. When you say that kind of thing, like that assumes a team of 5 or 6 people and this or that, but a lot of these things aren't like that way. But you may still be taking PayPal or credit card numbers, or obviously one of them would be always use a Active Merchant or something like that. I guess that's what I'm saying. Are there, besides Active Merchant, what other gems or other recommendations would you have that would get you further down the road towards secure development practices?
Bundler Audit will help you identify gems that have security vulnerabilities. So that way you can know, hey, there's been a CVE on, there's a lot of them. But
that'll catch you, like, even when Active Merchant has a vulnerability disclosed, you'll get notified, oh, Active Merchant needs to be patched because there's something that people know about how to exploit.
Right.
Basically, like, the state of dependency management in Ruby is just still kind of Wild West. There's a lot going on. There's no one auditing code. I would say focus instead on drilling down to the security concepts, like the process fundamentals, where you're asking those questions: secure against what? What's the worst thing that can happen? How could this possibly be untrustworthy? All that kind of stuff, and that'll just help you not make decisions that will lead you down the wrong path that way, instead of trying to trust tools to do it for you, because usually they will not do it. Basically, there is no security switch in terms of the dependencies that you use or anything like that.
Brakeman's very good. It will catch.
Brakeman catches
a lot.
All of the most common mistakes that are easy accidents to make within Rails. Rails defaults to some stuff if you just don't think about, oh, I'm giving a user access to something by letting them specify the ID that they're looking for. Well, maybe it's supposed to be something that only belongs to the current user. That type of stuff where you just have to sort of think it through, but Brakeman helps you catch a lot of those things.
Yeah, they're tools. None of them are perfect. As far as client-facing, Code Climate has proven its weight in gold. It's almost just some of the open source tools wrapped up, but it has this report card interface that, when you show, especially if they have current code, and you're like, we have a failing grade, there's something deep down in someone's psyche that they don't want to show their parents that they had an F, that immediately gets you cleared to fix up some of those technical debt issues that usually it's pulling teeth to get people to prioritize without a tool like that. Yes, any questions? Great ones, thank you. I wish there was more, I really do. There's no magic bullet on that case. Anyone else? Any of the non-developers? Are you sufficiently scared?
When you talk about limiting, you said earlier something. Sorry. You said earlier about something, you said limiting surface area.
Yes.
How can you do that on multiple levels when functionality and like, making it easy for the user and the, to anybody, Joe Schmo, to plug in their information? Like, how do you kind of balance those two?
I think that's art more than science, balancing usability versus, and it's been my experience that anytime you can remove from the business process information that's not absolutely strictly necessary if it's sensitive, reduces the surface area tremendously. In the cases where you cannot do that, can you put together countermeasures, such as the encryption example? Okay, we're required to collect the driver's license, but staff members don't need access to this in the ordinary course of business, and actually there's only like 3 of them at a time that may need access if the police came knocking, and so we need a process. So we're able to carve that off so that it wasn't part of the normal attack surface area of the app, unlike, say, MongoHQ's system, which was customer service can do anything because they have to. Well, did they really have to do anything at any time? Maybe not. I can't answer that. It's a process, and it needs to start with a user story writing. Yes?
I'll add a little bit more to that. That's part of defense in depth, which is basically think about every component of your app as an interface to something. Every method is an interface, every class is an interface, the router is an interface, the browser has an interface, all that stuff. And think about restricting the amount of stuff that that interface contains or has access to at every level that you can. So for example, the Rails router, don't leave default routes left open by just declaring Rails resources, 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 when you actually only need the view actions for each of those.
Show and
or
create
perhaps
in the
for
upload.
a certain class of user, they only have read access, but not edit access. And then at the controller level, don't let the user assign an arbitrary ID to a resource to load and then grant them access to. Check and make sure that they own it or that they have the correct rights to do something with it first. That's another layer. At the model layer, maybe you don't want to arbitrarily assign attributes. Maybe there's some special thing that's the admin flag. You don't want any user to accidentally be able to trigger the admin flag getting set to true. So add extra layers of restriction at each layer of your application. And it's not layers, but it's, just constrain what you're exposing to be arbitrarily accessed, and that's sort of the broad definition of surface area. It covers all of that.
Yes?
Yeah, I think broadly, there's not as much of a...
There's not as much of an issue, security at the expense of usability. Most of the time, it's just locking down the things that users would have access to, but would not need at all in the normal course of business.
Yeah.
So.
And to not just lock it down by not giving them a button, but actually lock it down, like into the application itself.
On your last slide, if I understood the list correctly of tools, it looked like those were static analysis tools. Do you have any recommendations on more active tools? And the one is Gauntlet.
I've not used Gauntlet specifically. Have you had any experience with it?
We've started to use it, but I'd say we're just scratching the surface. But I'm wondering if you have any that you have used that you would recommend that are more running on the active system.
As a Ruby developer, not primarily. I would say some of the hardest things to test is security vulnerabilities, because so often when you're doing TDD, you're ultimately testing the happy path. And maybe a couple of, one tool that's not a tool like that, but is a technique that we're just starting to use, is you have user stories and you have abuse stories. As a malicious adversary, I want to do this bad thing that is unlike normal users in order to get access. So I will decompile your Android app to find out what's going on with the API calls, and then explore what I can do with that information. And that will help inform the development process to more lock these things down.
So it sounds like what you're saying is you want a devious security-minded test engineer to just poke and try things?
I think they're going to do better than individual tools. I mean, there's
in any sufficiently sized business, that's absolutely a necessary job description. Absolutely. Any place that is big enough to have departments should have someone doing that. In very small businesses like we typically work with, there's no one hired for that. There's barely anyone hired at all. And so it becomes our responsibility to be thinking about those things, even just at a high level. Like, we're helping our clients formulate what their written security policy should look like so that as they hire people, they can plan for, all right, we need to make sure some of these things are getting accounted for in our processes, and not just being ignored completely. Again, like, everyone assumes that it's someone else's job to take care of the security stuff. And our job is to make sure everyone understands that's not the way it works.
Yeah. And you can use web inspectants, like these scanners.
Yeah, you can always do this manually.
They're of
as you're
some
developing.
value.
You know, I've used AirBreak or something like that before that categorizes new errors. And
Oh yeah, I almost forgot that was a tool to mention. I use AirBreak all the time. It's awesome because don't ignore exceptions. Like, they mean something.
You know, if somebody's attacking you, like, you're just going to start to see, like, this IP address or group IP address, and you're starting to hit things and just see what they're doing, see what they're trying, see why these errors are appearing in your log, like, and maybe handle them, you know, so that they're not errors.
Yeah, that's another component we didn't get into detail on, but that was part of the whole active logging, activity logging thing, is having someone who's just watching what's happening within your system is a huge security measure, because that's like having a beat cop on the corner. No robberies are going to happen on that block. And it's basically, well, on the internet, the robbery will still happen, but the beat cop's going to detect it, notice something fishy is happening, and say, hey, there's a bunch of weird errors that keep occurring. Like, can we look into this, figure out what might be happening? Is someone trying to break into something? And you get to respond quicker.
And in our sorts of organizations, security-like exceptions take first priority. It doesn't. I mean, the CEO could be doing a demo this afternoon, and they want a feature moved, but a security alert is going to take precedence over that. It's the sort of thing you can set up, like, as a development team rule, like in your pivotal tracker or something. It's like, no, drop everything, deal with this, if it's bad enough. So. Yes, sir.
So as a part of your defensive depth strategy, do you end up working with, like, mandatory access controls at the system layer, like SC Linux or AppArmor?
Those are very useful. You certainly could. So he asked about mandatory access control, which is typically the antithesis of DAC, mandatory discretionary access control. That's file permissions type systems. Usually classified systems work like that, and SC Linux is a great tool for that. Not so much in Rails, but that sounds like a fun project to do more of.
That is the kind of thing. Some of these tools are so fiddly that you need to actually have a person on staff whose job is to manage those things.
A lot of stuff in Rails ends up running as the web application process, which is tools like Docker can help with that from a management point of view. And that ends up using Linux LXC containers, and that plus like SE Linux could give you a really fine-grained control on process isolation and access control.
One reason we've never even had to strongly consider any of those things is we basically only run a web app server on a virtual machine. We don't have a whole bunch of other stuff going on in the background, but like we sort of tightly compartmentalize at the virtual machine level, so it's not as much of an issue for us.
Great question. Yes, sir.
So just from a security perspective, how much better do you feel about, say, credit data if it is you're using Stripe or Braintree or someone with the option that, hey, we're only going to store data on your servers?
To tokenize it and not store it.
Yeah.
You're shifting the liability for PCI DSS to them, and presumably, since that is their entire business, that they're going to do a better job at it than your little startup. That is not to say that Stripe does not face serious security concerns of their own to manage, but you're outsourcing that to them. And for most businesses, that's an appropriate thing in the case of payment data.
Okay, so the balance of aim at a bigger target that's better secured is better than be a small target that maybe is less secured?
A PCI DSS data breach will put a small company out of business. So it's a form of insurance to not get involved in that.
Yeah.
Plus,
you're talking about a small target. Well, on the internet, everything's automated, so there's no such thing as a random, a pre-selected attack. Everything is just bots jiggling the doorknobs. So we see traffic logs all the time that are specific, like Metasploit techniques that are widely known. You can download Metasploit, try it out against your application yourself. Don't try it against anyone else's application.
Yes,
but we see specific, URL patterns that are crafted to exploit certain old versions of PHP and stuff like that. We see that traffic every day, and we just sort of filter it out. But there are, new vulnerabilities discovered every day, including Rails, including everything else that we use periodically. And our job is to patch it quickly, make sure that we pay attention to what happened during the time that it might have been exposed, et cetera. But the point is, there's random attacks always going on against everything. The internet's wide open in that regard. So there's no discrimination when it comes to how valuable are you as a target.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
All right, that's officially the end of the meetup. You got to be out in like 10 minutes, I think, by 7:30. So feel free to stick around and talk for 10 minutes. Then we all
stick around for 10 minutes and get out.
Thanks for the presentation. It's funny. I used to work in Atlanta.
This video has been sponsored by Rietta Incorporated. Learn more today at rietta.com.